I absolutely love creating seasonal drawings, and since we're now in October, it seems the perfect time to make a new Halloween themed drawing. I'm going to talk you through today the process that I use to create this fun witch's hat. Now, you may think at first glance this is going to be a pretty simple drawing, but actually there's a lot more to it than you might expect. It's not just a plain black hat, it's got more than anything a lot of interesting lighting, particularly the blue lights all down the left hand side. And there's just a lot of general shading that needs to be created from all of the folds on the hat. So I'll talk you through the process that I've used for this and talk you through what I'm thinking when I'm selecting the colours and building up all of these layers. Now I am going to go through this reasonably quickly here. If you want to go through it slower and in a lot more detail, I do have the full tutorial available on my website. In fact, I have a huge variety of tutorials, including a large range of autumn themed drawings. And I have tutorials in coloured pencil, graphite pencil and watercolour pencil. For each and every one of these tutorials I include really in-depth instructions as well as all of the real-time footage, details of all of the colours that I'm using, sketch outlines, both light outlines in case you want to print them directly onto your drawing paper, and heavier sketch outlines if you want to trace. And then I also include the reference photos so you can go through this with me and see exactly what I'm seeing. I have a mixture of shorter, more beginner-friendly tutorials as well as some much longer, more in-depth tutorials, but they tend to have a lot more wow factor. Check out the link in the description. So let's get started with this hat, and I want to start in the way that I usually would by looking for the lightest colour I can see in each area. So I would say the lightest colour on the black main hat is actually a very light cool grey. So I'm going to use this pencil to block in over the whole of the hat. Now the most important thing here as we're building up all of the different layers is to press really lightly. Obviously we're starting off with this very light grey. We're going to need to build a lot of colour over the top of this, and if I press hard I'm not going to be able to do that. Now to help me press as lightly as possible, you'll notice that I'm holding the pencil further back than you might expect. I'm holding it about halfway down the barrel. What that does is literally stop me from being able to press too hard. I also want to try and get down the pencil as smoothly as possible. We will be adding all of the different folds within the hat, but I do want that general underlying colour to be as smooth as I can. So here I'm working in kind of circular or oval motions to again get this down as smoothly as possible. And the last thing I'm particularly thinking about at this point is keeping my pencil nice and sharp. You want to be frequently sharpening your pencil. Trying to put down smooth, even light colour with a blunt pencil is very hard. It's going to be much easier and go down much more consistently with a sharp pencil. Now it's quite hard to see at this point, but once I've put that lightest colour over the whole of the hat, I can then move on to the lightest colour in the next section. So I'm going to move on to the green ribbon, and I want to be looking for the lightest colour I can see here. So this is a kind of greeny blue, I guess. I feel like it's the closest match to those lightest areas. And I'm once again going to mark this pencil in everywhere that is this colour as the lightest colour. So you can see I'm marking in the edge of a section first, so I have a really nice and crisp outline. And then I can start working in circular motions once I've done that to block in that area nice and light like I did with the rest of the hat. So you can see me here holding the pencil about halfway back, working in these circular motions and working with a sharp pencil. And that is literally all I want to be doing for that first step, is looking for the lightest colour in each area and then blocking in the colour to put something down in each section. It's kind of so I can slowly start getting my bearings on what's going where. Now there is one more colour that I need to be adding for this lightest colour, and I'm looking at the moon brooch. So the moon brooch I still think is a grey as the lightest colour, but it's more of a warm grey rather than a cold grey. It's a small difference, but I do think it will show later if we use the same grey on both. So I can block in that moon, and then I've got, as I say, something down on each area. So now what I'm going to do is gradually start working my way from the lighter colours towards the darker colours, and I'm going to start gradually marking in all of the different shapes I can see. So I'm going to move on to the next darkest colour, which actually there's a huge range of colours within the the hat. A lot of them are generally quite dark. I think the next darkest color is probably this bluey purple, which is great for adding in all of those patches of light along that left-hand side. So I want to be looking at the shapes that are along here because it's not just one smooth line, and block in where I can see all of these shapes. So there's various folds going, particularly along this left-hand side because their hat is tilting over to the side. And I want to mark in where all of these patches of light will go. The goal here now is to get all of these shapes marked in, work out what needs to go where before we move on to the really dark colors. There's obviously going to be so much black that I need to build up on the hat, but I don't want to do that until I really know where everything's going. So there's a few areas where I need to add more purple on the slightly lighter. There's kind of a fold going through the middle of the hat here as well. So now I'm going to keep working gradually from those lighter colors towards the darker colors. And I'm going to use now another cold gray. So this is similar to the last pencil, but just the darker version. And I'm going to use this to go over the whole of the hat and generally make everything a bit darker. I want to make it clearer where the outline of the hat is and generally smooth out the edges of that kind of purpley blue color. But you'll see that I'm still holding the pencil quite far back. I still want to be pressing nice and lightly. We've still got a lot of color to build up. I'm also still working with that sharp pencil and working in circular motions. And quite quickly actually, I've got something that does kind of roughly look like a witch's hat, but we need to further build on this. So I can now move on to a slightly darker pencil again. And I'm actually here going to use a very dark blue rather than a black. So I don't feel like there's a lot of color on this hat, particularly on the black area of the hat, between the very light gray and the very dark areas. Particularly if you're just looking at kind of the simpler colors, it is pretty just solid blocks of either light and dark. But rather than right now going over all of these different shapes with the black pencil, if I use this very dark blue, it's going to give an extra richness to the black when I put it over the top. If I just do black on its own, I think it can often look quite harsh. This blue is going to, as an underlying color, make it look richer. And it works really well with the cool grays we've already been using. And it's kind of, it looks a bit more mid-tone than I think the black would. So what I'm doing here is looking at the shapes I can see on the hat and marking out those shapes. It all looks a little bit odd, but that's okay. This is very much an area where I want to be getting my bearings, as I said, and working out where everything's going. There's quite a prominent kind of zigzag of light going through the middle of the hat, so I've got that marked in. And generally speaking, the hat is lighter on the right hand side and darker on the left, so I generally am filling this in that kind of way. So as I say, I think it looks a bit peculiar at this point, but that's okay. I just want to gradually build up the colors. So now I've got all of those main shapes marked out on the hat section. Let's do the same on the ribbon. So right now we've just got a very light kind of bluey green. I'm actually going to use a much darker green. This is the darkest green in my set, to again fill in where those darker areas are going to go. So I don't think this green is the darkest area on the ribbon. I think there are much darker colors that we'll need to be adding in later. But for now, this is a great color to be marking in both the mid-tone and the darkest areas to again work out where all of the different shapes are. There's so many sort of folds within the ribbon, and all of the shadows that they create need to be marked in. You can see quite quickly, you can work out where everything needs to be going, where all of these folds need to go. I find it easiest to work at one section at a time, so I'm just focusing on this little area to the left of the knot in the middle of the ribbon, and then I can work on just this tail of the ribbon. So it's much easier to work on one small area at a time and just focus on putting this pencil anywhere that is a mid-tone or darker. I often think if you're trying to draw a ribbon and you're drawing it as a ribbon, it's going to be much harder than if you're just trying to draw this as a series of random shapes and gradients. Focusing on drawing what you see, it will all come together in a much easier way. So let's also fill in some of the color on the moon here. So this is a kind of orangey brown, I guess, but it's the closest color that I think I have in my set to a gold. So I'll block in the main shapes that I can see on the moon, and then then I want to do the same with a slightly darker pencil. So I can move on to a quite dark brown. This is actually the darkest brown that I have in my set, but I don't think it's a very dark color, and we will need to add some black over the top to make this as dark as this moon needs to be. So let's now on the ribbon move on to the black, and I want to be putting this everywhere that needs to be very dark. Now this is so much easier because I've already mapped a lot of these shapes in with the dark green. So I'm pretty clear on where everything needs to go. You can see me building up all of this still with circular motions. I am holding the pencil closer to the tip here because I do need to be more accurate about where this is going. But I still wouldn't say I'm using a firm pressure, maybe slightly firmer than I was before, but certainly I'm not pressing hard. So I'll fill in some of the black on the brooch as well, just to make that a little bit darker. And then once I'm happy with the ribbon, I'm happy with the general shading for now. It will need building up a lot more later, but I have a good idea on where everything's going. I now want to do the exact same thing on the rest of the hat. So I'm still using the black pencil here, and I can use all of the shapes that I've already marked in with that grey to build up all of these black sections. So you can see gradually I'm still not pressing hard here, and there's still a lot of black that we will need to add later, but for now gradually we're ending up with something that is starting to look a bit more like a dark witch's hat. So you can see I've gone all the way up to the top of the hat. I'm just building up and working through this again one section at a time, looking at where it needs to be darker, particularly on this left hand side, and generally where all of the folds are. Now I think it's always important to remember, if you want to make an area darker like I am for a lot of this hat, you want to be working in circular motions and going over the area more times rather than just pressing full force. You can see it's gradually making a very nice and dark black on the hat, but it's still looking nice and soft. It's not looking really harsh. So now at this point I've worked from those lighter colours towards the darker colours. What I now want to do is work through this again, but I'm now thinking about the most obvious colour that's missing, and I'm going to keep doing that until it looks like a good and finished witch's hat. So right now the most obvious thing that I think is missing is the purple down the left hand side. All of the purple that I added in before has kind of got a little bit lost, and I want to make it a lot more obvious and a lot bolder. So I'm going to build up a lot more of this colour in a few different purples. I've got the more bluey purple here, and a second ago I used a much more kind of standard purple. And now I'm going to use a few colours that might be surprising down the right hand side. So to start with, I'm adding in that same kind of brown that I used on the brooch to make this a bit more of an interesting colour. If you look past all of the black on this right hand side, I do feel like it's got some really interesting, rich kind of a mixture of orangey, browny, purple tones. So let's also add some of this purpley red down this right hand side to mix those two colours together. And on some of the lighter areas, I can go back to that very dark blue I used earlier and just make this a little bit darker. I think a lot of the light areas at this point are looking too light. And then I'm going to keep working through this one section at a time. So now focusing on the ribbon, I feel like I added a lot of dark green in here before, but now that the black has been added over the top, it kind of looks a little bit lost. The dark green areas weren't looking dark enough, and the light green areas I think just didn't have enough colour. So let's build up all of these greens before then again toning down those lighter areas on the hat so that they look a little bit less bright with the same grey, the same darker grey that I used at the very beginning. And then again back to the purple. So even though a second ago I felt like I had enough purple, once I've added in all of these other colours, it then shows we don't have enough purple. So once I've got a really solid base of all of those underlying colours, I've built up so many colours. What is now missing is we don't have enough black. All of the dark areas aren't looking dark enough. On the most part, it looks like a kind of washed out witch's hat. And this is where it's all going to come together. I can build up all of this black over those shadows the shadows that I've already marked in to really make them pop. And you can see what a huge difference this is making and how it's bringing the whole drawing together. There's actually an awful lot of pencil that needs building up, particularly on that left-hand side. But also a lot of kind of different shapes and folds are on the right-hand side within that light as well. We don't need as much black on this right-hand side, but I do need some. So hopefully this shows how much you have to build up all of the layers, even with something that I think on the face of it looks pretty simple, because what it is a very dark hat. You kind of assume on the most part it's black. And there is an awful lot of black within the drawing, but I also think there's a lot more to it than just that. But as always, I think it works best to work from the lighter colors towards the darker colors and then tweak it from there. Now let's just brighten up some of these areas on the left, make them maybe a little bit more of a hint of blue. And that is the end of the drawing. Now I hope that you found this helpful. If you have, please click the like button and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notify bell. Now remember, if you want to go through this with me in a lot more detail, it is available on my website. Now if you want to have a look at another very popular Halloween drawing of mine, have a look at this pumpkin drawing here. Happy drawing, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.